Louisiana has the kind of stories people will tell you with a smile. Ghosts, creatures, strange lights out over the water. But every now and then, you ask about the wrong place, and the smile disappears. The answer gets shorter. Somebody looks toward the window. Then you hear something like, "Don't go out there at night." Tonight, we're going into 6 Louisiana swamp mysteries that have been passed around for decades, sometimes much longer. Some have perfectly reasonable explanations. Some, I'm still not sure what to do with. Are you ready? Lock your doors, put your headphones on, pull your blanket tight, because after tonight, you may never look at a Louisiana swamp the same way again. This is Marked Terror. We're starting near New Orleans, and right away there's a problem. Nobody seems to agree on what the Grunch actually is. Look it up today and you'll get everything from a goat-like creature to something that looks almost like a chupacabra. Glowing eyes, claws, animals used as bait, old roads where drivers supposedly shouldn't stop. That's the modern version. The older story is a little messier, and I trust messy folklore more than folklore that comes with a perfect description. Back in 1971, folklorist Christy Harling published an article called The Grunch, an example of New Orleans teenage folklore. So the legend wasn't born on TikTok. It was already being passed around among young people more than 50 years ago. Descriptions from those older versions weren't consistent. Some accounts leaned towards something part human, part goat or sheep. Other retellings barely described the creature at all. What mattered was the road, the isolation, being somewhere you weren't supposed to be after dark. That makes sense to me. A lot of urban legends work that way. You don't inherit a monster. You inherit a warning. One kid hears that something chased a car. A few years later, somebody says it scratched the door. Then another person remembers glowing eyes. By the time the story reaches the internet, the creature has a full anatomy. That doesn't mean the original story was fake. It means people do what people have always done. They fill in the blanks. And the Grunch has a lot of blanks. Even the supposed location of the original Grunch road changes depending on who's telling the story. Some say the road vanished. Others say development covered it. And there are people who'll swear they know where it was. I don't. And I wouldn't drive around at midnight looking for it just to settle the argument. Because in Louisiana, getting turned around after dark has its own folklore. And this next one is much older. Picture a marsh at night. No road signs, no phone signal, no bright city sky behind you, just water, grass, mud, tree roots, and darkness. Then you notice a light. Small, low to the ground. It looks close enough to reach. So you walk toward it. The light shifts. You follow again. A few minutes later, you stop. And nothing around you looks familiar. South Louisiana has an old name for that light. Feu Follet. Fool's Fire. This isn't some recent ghost tour invention. A Louisiana manuscript dating to around 1840 already described the Feu Follet as something believed to lead people away from the path in marshes or dark wooded areas. That's the part people forget. The legend was never really about admiring a strange light. It was about what happened if you followed it. Some traditions treated the light like a wandering spirit. Others made it sound mischievous, sometimes dangerous. And yes, there are natural explanations worth considering. Wetlands release gases. Light reflects strangely over water. Distant boats, homes, insects, atmospheric effects. In complete darkness, ordinary things can look wrong. Especially if you're tired. Especially if you're already lost. Personally, I don't need a ghost to explain why somebody could become disoriented in a swamp. That part is easy. What interests me is how long the warning survived. Don't follow the light. People were saying some version of that generation after generation. Maybe that was the whole point. If your family lived near marshland in the 19th century, telling a child not to wander off wasn't enough. Tell them something out there wants them lost. Now they remember. And I'll admit something. If I saw a little light floating between the trees at 2 in the morning, I'd probably have a very scientific reaction. I'd turn around, fast. At least the Feu Follet gives you that option. The next tradition begins after you've already gone to bed. No creature outside. No footsteps on the porch. Nothing scratching at the window. You wake up, and you can't move. That's it. Honestly, that's enough. In parts of Louisiana, especially within French-speaking and Creole traditions, people told stories about the cockamar. The details vary, but the experience is usually familiar. A person wakes during the night. They know they're awake. They can see the room. They try to sit up. Nothing happens. Sometimes there's pressure on the chest. Sometimes they think somebody or something is in the room with them. Today, most people would hear that and say, sleep paralysis. And they'd have a good reason. Sleep paralysis is real. During REM sleep, the body limits most voluntary muscle movement. Sometimes the mind becomes aware before that paralysis fully releases. You're awake enough to know where you are, but your body hasn't caught up yet. Hallucinations can happen too. Faces, shadows, a figure near the bed, a sense that something is pressing down on you. We understand the mechanism a lot better now, but imagine having that experience 150 years ago. Nobody in the room knows what REM sleep is. You wake up frozen. You think you see somebody standing near the wall. Then the next morning, your grandmother listens to you for 30 seconds and says, "Oh, that." Now it has a name, and once something frightening has a name, it gets harder to forget. Louisiana folklorists collected personal accounts of cockamar experiences. People weren't always telling them like ghost stories either. Some spoke about it like something that had happened to them. No dramatic buildup, no monster description, just, "I woke up, I couldn't move." That feels more unsettling to me than a polished legend. Because I've heard people describe sleep paralysis today almost the same way. Different century, different explanation, same fear. The Cauchemar stayed close to the bedroom. Louisiana's most famous creature was said to wander much farther. Now we get to the one everybody thinks they know, the Rougarou, usually described online as Louisiana's version of a werewolf. That's not entirely wrong, but it's not really enough either. The name comes from loup-garou, a French term associated with werewolf traditions. Once the story settled into Louisiana culture, though, it changed, and not everybody described the creature as a wolf. That surprised me. Accounts collected in Cajun and Houma traditions mention different forms, dog-like, animal-like, sometimes something harder to describe. The physical appearance wasn't always the important part. The curse was. In a number of versions, the Rougarou isn't a creature that was born a monster. It's a person trapped in something. At night, that person changes. To get free, the curse has to pass to somebody else. How that happens depends on which version you heard growing up. A bite, blood, an encounter nobody wants to explain too clearly. Then there's the secrecy. Some stories say that if you learn who the Rougarou really is, you're not supposed to reveal the person's identity for a period of time. That changes the whole story. Now it isn't. There's a monster in the swamp. It's, you know the monster. Maybe you saw that person at church. Maybe they worked with your father. Maybe they waved to you yesterday. That's a much better legend. And Louisiana folklorists have noted something strange about Rougarou traditions. For such a famous creature, the number of older archived personal accounts isn't as large as you might expect. One reason suggested is pretty simple. Some people didn't want to talk about it, especially with outsiders. I understand that. Not every family story was meant for tourists. Sometimes somebody tells you something because you're family. You don't record it. You don't write it down. You definitely don't post it. Then the person who told you dies, and now you're the one carrying it. The Rougarou also worked as a warning. Don't stay out too late. Don't wander off. Behave. Listen to your elders. Religion sometimes became part of the story too. Parents have been scaring children into good behavior since there have been parents and children. The Rougarou just did it with more teeth. But I don't think that explains everything people loved about the legend. There's a sad part to it. The creature may not want to be what it is. That's different from a monster hunting people because it enjoys it. A cursed person is stuck, and the only way out may be to ruin somebody else's life. That's dark. No swamp required. The next story is different, because before anybody called it a curse, there was a real woman and a real storm. About 30 miles north of New Orleans, in the wetlands around Manchac, there were once communities called Frenier and Ruddock. People lived there, worked there, raised families there. Ruddock had a sawmill, a post office, and hundreds of residents. Frenier was smaller. A woman named Julia Brown lived there. She was black. She owned property. Historical accounts connect her with folk healing traditions and with a respected place in the community. Then history turned her into something else. Depending on which version you hear today, Julia Brown became a healer, a hoodoo woman, a prophet, a witch. Sometimes all four before the storyteller reaches the end. There's a famous line attributed to her. The story says Julia would sing, "One day I'm going to die and take the whole town with me." Do we have a recording of her singing that? No. So I'm not going to pretend we do. It belongs to the legend. What happened afterward is real. Julia Brown died in 1915. Her funeral took place on September 29th. On the same day, a catastrophic hurricane struck Louisiana. Frenier and Ruddock were hit hard. Homes were destroyed. Floodwater overwhelmed the area. People died. The communities never fully came back. Think about how that would have felt if you lived there. A woman dies. People already remember unsettling things she supposedly said. Then her funeral begins, and one of the worst storms the area has seen comes straight through. You don't need the supernatural for people to connect those events. Humans are built to connect events, especially terrible ones. There was another detail. As the weather became too dangerous, the funeral gathering broke apart. Historical accounts say Brown's remains were later recovered. Her casket was reportedly gone. That detail alone could keep a story alive for 100 years. And it did. Afterward, people said Julia had predicted the hurricane. Others said she caused it. Tours and modern retellings added even more. That's where I think this story deserves some respect. Julia Brown was a real woman. Those communities were real. The hurricane was real. The deaths were real. She doesn't need to become a cartoon witch for this story to work. Actually, I think the true version is more disturbing. People watched their towns disappear. Then they had to live with the memory. Folklore stepped in afterward. That happens a lot. A disaster ends. The weather clears. The water drops. But the story keeps changing for decades. And Manchac never completely escaped Julia Brown. Her name is still attached to the swamp. So are stories about ghosts. So are Rougarou stories. You can decide what you believe. I'm more interested in why the place never managed to shake the feeling. Which brings us to the last case. And this one has a problem the others don't. People tried to leave evidence behind. Honey Island Swamp sits near the Pearl River, close to the Louisiana-Mississippi border. Before we talk about monsters, look at the landscape. That matters. Cypress, tupelo, dark water, thick vegetation. Sightlines that disappear almost immediately. You could be 20 yards from a large animal and see almost nothing but movement. It's not hard to understand how people misidentify things in a place like that. Then Harlan Ford came along. Ford was an outdoorsman and former air traffic controller. He spent time in Honey Island with a man named Billy Mills. Beginning in the 1960s, Ford claimed they had encountered something unusual in the swamp. His description became the classic Honey Island swamp monster. Large, hair-covered, walking upright, amber eyes. Close enough to human in shape that Ford reportedly didn't believe he was looking at a bear. Then came the footprints. Ford made plaster casts of tracks he believed belonged to the creature. They looked strange, not human. Not exactly like an ape either. And I want to be careful here. A strange footprint proves somebody found a strange footprint. That's it. It doesn't prove Louisiana has a hidden primate. Ford had critics. Some locals thought he and his friends created the whole thing. One theory was that the monster story helped keep strangers away from hunting territory. Others accused the men of faking tracks. There were even stories about devices being used to manufacture footprints. That sounds pretty damaging. And it is. But then Ford died in 1980. After his death, members of his family reportedly discovered material he'd kept. Among it was film. The footage is rough, grainy. A large, dark, hairy-looking figure appears behind trees. You can't see enough. And anybody who tells you that footage clearly proves what the figure is seeing more than I am. Could it be a person? Of course. Could Ford have staged it? Yes. Could he have filmed an animal and genuinely believed it was something else? Sure. Those possibilities don't require anything paranormal, but they also don't tell us what Ford thought he saw. That distinction matters. People can be wrong without lying. I think we forget that sometimes. A man sees something for 3 seconds. His brain does its best. 30 years later, the story sounds impossible. That doesn't automatically mean the first man invented it. Other people eventually reported strange encounters in the Honey Island area too. One local outdoorsman, Neil Benson, spoke about seeing a tall figure moving upright through water when he was young. He didn't claim he had proof of a monster. He said he saw something he couldn't identify. I respect that answer. "I don't know what I saw" is usually more interesting than "I definitely saw a 7-foot cryptid." Louisiana doesn't need monsters to feel dangerous. The real landscape already does enough. People have gotten lost in those wetlands. Storms have erased communities. Families have passed warnings down for generations because sometimes warnings keep people alive. Then time gets involved. A strange light becomes a spirit. A nightmare gets a name. A warning becomes a creature. A hurricane becomes a curse. And a shadow behind the trees becomes something people argue about for 60 years. Maybe folklore is just memory after enough people have had time to change it. I can live with that explanation. Most nights, anyway. Now I want to hear from Louisiana. If you grew up there, which of these did your family actually talk about? Not something you found online, something you heard from somebody older. And if there's a swamp story people outside Louisiana usually get wrong, tell me that one too. We might come back. Until next time, stay curious. And if you see a light moving over the water after dark, I'd leave it alone.